And go ahead, Suzanne.
Oh, what should I do? Oh, okay, here we go. Oh, okay, well, good evening, everybody. This is the third in our Meet the Federal Candidate series for New Westminster-Burnaby. And this is Judy Green. And I have heard really wonderful things about her. So let's hear what you have to say.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you, Suzanne. Well, we'll do this just kind of as a meet and greet, but I'll give you a little background. My background isn't in politics, like many of the politicians or Greens who have become politicians. I didn't set out to be a politician. I don't have a poli-sci degree. I have computer science degrees, and I've run 4 different small businesses, very vastly different businesses. So I have an interesting breadth of experience and skills to bring to the party. When I became involved with the Green Party, it was the Green Party of Nova Scotia in the summer of 2018, and was the convener for Fundy Shore. I'm now the regional rep for Fundy Shore, and my compatriot Sheila Richardson and I, she's kind of a mentor for me and longtime Green, and we kind of bounce back and forth in that role so far until we find new people to take on those roles. So that's the goal, is that we'll increase the Green presence and bring people up through the ranks to get the experience in the different positions. And then the IPCC report came out, and I realized we didn't have as much time as I had thought we had. I was giving the Heading Toward Extinction talks for Extinction Rebellion, doing that in our area quite a number of times. And then we knew the federal election was going to start happening. And so we started preparing, and I fully expected to work on someone else's campaign in the 2019 election. I didn't have campaign experience. I wanted to have go through the election process helping somebody else with their campaign, but that didn't quite work out that way. We didn't have somebody step forward, and so I threw my hat in and was acclaimed on the 13th of June, which is like a year ago yesterday. And we hit the ground running. So we didn't have a big EDA. We had the previous candidate, and we had $36 in the bank account, but we had an EDA on the books, which was something that we were very excited about. So we really broke our campaign into 2 parts. And the first part was just getting out and getting a Green presence in our riding. We've got a very large, mostly rural riding. And one of the cool things is that through the summertime, there are different festivals in all the different towns. So every single weekend, you could be at a different town, a different festival, which means a different parade, which means a different opportunity for us to be out there being green, having fun and talking to people. So that was our strategies, go where the people are, because there was no way, we didn't have the number of volunteers or canvassers necessary to go door to door to the extent that we really need to. And so that was our way. Our strategy was to get out and go where the people were. And to a large degree, that worked well for us. When the writ was dropped, then we shifted into definitely door knocking and events, and we did 6 debates as well. First in French, last in French. I am working hard to learn French. I'm still not at the point where I can debate in French. But I've been working with a translator who has been amazing. So he's helping, and I am taking French classes. But you know, if you've never lived anywhere in the country, in order to use the French, what little you do learn along the way, you lose. So that's been my experience with French, but I am committed to learning the language. And so we really learned as we went. Didn't have near enough people. We did have an amazing group of people who gave their hearts and souls. But we know that you need like literally hundreds of volunteers in order to win in these ridings, and that's just the reality. That's the numbers game. We did raise over $16,000, which was a record for Greens in our area. We took the vote from 4.1% to 12.69%. We came in 3rd in our riding, which was very good, and our riding's the only riding that turned blue. In Nova Scotia, all the rest are liberal. But it was an amazing experience. Went through that hangover, and I was like, okay, well, what's next? And I had a hard time letting go of the issues that we have to fix at a federal level. you know, for climate change, yes, we can work on adaptation and we can work on mitigation on a local level, but to really fix the problems is going to require legislation at the federal level, so that we can stop the basically what Peter Bevan Baker says is digging stuff out of the ground and burning it, which is at the root of our issues with climate change. So I started working with some grassroots greens on a couple of different projects. We learned some of what's going on in terms of the structure of the party, how communication works within the federal party. And when I'm talking to people about what happened in their campaigns, a lot of what we were hearing from people was very much the same. People felt, campaigns in general felt that they were on their own, that yes, there was the organizer's toolkit and that there were organizers, but they are so spread thin because they're having to deal with so many ridings that it was really difficult. I know when I reached out to Marlene, I tried to be really short, sweet, and get to the point because I knew her time was really, really precious, and she was being spread thin. So we didn't have, I think, the resources that were possible, and it wasn't necessarily that we needed them during the RIT period. It's like, it didn't make sense to me that we ramp up a few months before the RIT drops, and then we go like heck, and then everything goes away afterwards, and then you're starting from scratch again 4 years later. Like in Nova Scotia, we've been kind of lucky because we are 2 years between a federal and a provincial, so people will work the federal, and that goes away, they work the provincial, that goes away, they work the federal, but we're still not, like, we're taking 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. We're not building our volunteer base, we're not building our presence in the ridings, we're not training our volunteers and growing leaders from within local communities that are maybe marginalized or really, we need to work with them and create a safe space in our EDAs in order to have our First Nation, or not our, but First Nations and Black communities, racialized communities feel safe within our party. And that takes work. That's not going to happen if we're going away and then coming back with a completely new set of people. We need to be learning how to manage our volunteers and grow them, provide the resources that they require, but also not burn them out. There's a lot of burnt out volunteers after campaigns. And this is true for our candidates as well. Like, our candidate retention rate is really low. There's so many candidates that will not be coming back, and have said that in surveys that have been sent out, that we need to find out why that is and make sure that we give them the supports that they need. And a big part of that is that the ones I spoke to where they felt like they were on their own. So there are things that we can do structurally within the party, and we don't have to have staff doing everything. Like, we have volunteers, amazingly talented volunteers, that as long as we put the structure in place, we can activate and empower those volunteers in order to be able to do a lot of this organizational work and this training. So having mentors between EDAs that are highly established and newer EDAs, have mentors between new Greens and perhaps young Greens, and do some training, some skills training. There's training that we really all need to be able to do, especially on social media, videos, photography, very basic skills like that we may not have within our volunteer base, but those are skills that you can bring up to speed on a rudimentary level through Zoom calls, videos, trainings, that we can be a little more proactive between campaigns, but not necessarily coming from, it needs to be organized or supervised from national, so that we have consistent training, but the actual workers doing it can all be volunteers. And that is something to keep people engaged going forward. So there's a ton of different ideas. Oh, I've got somebody else coming in. Sorry, I have to pay attention to that, or we're going to leave people in the waiting room too long. And so when I started thinking about that, what we really need is a network across Canada. And that's kind of what I'm doing with my leadership campaign. You know, I would love to be the next leader of the Green Party of Canada, and I believe I have the skills necessary to do that. But you know, I always do this. I plan to shoot for the moon, and in the last election, that was winning the election. Falling short was I land amongst the stars, which meant getting over 10% of the vote. So I have the same sort of planning strategy in the leadership contest as well. Winning is to lead the party, and you know, really empower EDAs across Canada. And but I can do that, part of that, during this leadership campaign by getting in and talking to people in the different EDAs, connecting them with others, and sharing some of the tips and tricks that I'm learning along the way. You know, there's simple things that we organized a webinar with Jenica Atlin's campaign team, tips and tricks from a winning campaign, and we would like to do some more of that across Canada, both provincial and federal winning campaigns, so that we can learn what worked, and so that Greens across Canada can learn from each other. We need to be doing more of that connecting and building the team across Canada that then empowers us in our own EDAs, so that we can get the work done and have the resources necessary to be vital and strong and active on the ground, and not just between or not just at election time. You know, one of the things that I learned in the last election was about listening campaigns. And those worked exceptionally well for us. So we had, much like Elizabeth May uses in her riding, it's a card that we have printed off, and it has the top issues that we think are the most important issues in our EDA, and room for people to add other things in. We put it on a clipboard. And when we go to a door, you basically introduce yourself and say, I'm representing the Green Party candidate in your riding, and she wants to know, what are the issues that are most important to you? And would you mind telling us? And you hand them the clipboard and a pencil. And invariably, people will take that pencil, and then they start thinking about it and start filling things out. And that gives you the opportunity to have a conversation with them. And if you are, when I'm there as the candidate, I know the platform, and I'm able to say, well, did you know that you know, the Greens are for a guaranteed livable income that's going to address this, or that we have this amazing climate action plan that's going to address that, or, you know, we have platform solutions to the issues that are top of mind for people. And so that's a really, really good tool to use. And that's something we don't have to wait for an election to do. We can do a listening campaign all year, every year. And that was our plan, was to be able to do that over the next year or two. And that would give us, if we went out even every week for a few hours, we would eventually get through all of the people that we wouldn't necessarily have time to get to during a general election. So there's a lot of things that that have come up like that. It is a new way of thinking about things, and it's about making relationships. Like, Canadian voters have lost trust in politics. And I know that personally, because I had to actually sit with the word politician and really sit with it for a while until I was comfortable with that word. And I was only comfortable with that word because the principles of the Green Party let me redefine it in those terms. Because what I had seen of politician and politics was not something I wanted to be or do. So it was more, I knew what I didn't want to do rather than having a role model that I wanted to emulate. And so there's a lot of people out there who have a similar backlash against politics and politicians. And so we have to, if we want to grow the vote, and that's the best way for the Greens to actually get into seats in Parliament and get those critical votes, is to grow the vote, is we need to earn the trust back of the Canadian voters. And the Greens are in a unique situation in order to do that. You know, we have our 6 principles. We consider ourselves extremely ethical, and we have to be true to that, because we say we are, we better be, because the Canadian electorate will hold us to that. And in marketing with business and such, I always learned that, you know, people don't necessarily remember what you tell them, but they do remember how you made them feel. So it's really important that people feel heard and that you take the time to listen to them.
Yes, no, I was going to say my motto throughout the election was every voice heard. And
Yes.
oh my, did I listen to some rants, terrible rants. And what I do is I just let them talk and listen, and I wouldn't judge or anything. And at the very end, I would say, well, the good news is, and then I would tell them, you know, our platform that would address the issue. But yeah,
Exactly.
you have to listen, and that's what people want to be heard.
They do, absolutely. And there's a lot of thought leaders in this area that will tell you that people will not listen to your story until you've listened to theirs.
Yeah,
and so true. and it's important. And, you know, even with traditional canvassing training, they'll tell you to pay attention to what's going on in the yard. Are there children's toys? Is there a beautiful garden that somebody's put work into? Like, find something that's not politics to open the conversation about. You know, to compliment them on something, or I see that, you know, to make that connection, that human connection.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you some questions about your policies. Like, where do you stand, say, with this whole thing with the RCMP and Black Lives Matter? And of course, that's what we see constantly in the news. So, so what do you see that we do? How do we go ahead? How do we fix this?
That's awesome question, Suzanne. I just want to preface first, because as the leader of the Green Party of Canada, my platform is the party's platform, and the party's platform is written by the members. Okay, so I would have the responsibility of representing that platform. I may have my own thoughts and ideas, but they don't become platform unless I go through the platform policy and the members vote that in. So with that preface, I've been doing a lot of looking into it, and you know, racism in general has been an issue for generations in Canada, with both you know, Blacks, Indigenous, you know, all people of color. We have some serious issues with systemic racism. You know, I think we've made some inroads with the outright racism, but the systemic racism is what we have to change. And part of it is linked to the colonial systems and the processes. So things like the RCMP, which was arguably created to control the Indian problem, is inherently built upon concepts that are racist. And you know, they talk about defunding the police, and people have a really visceral reaction to that term. I think it's an unfortunate term, although academically it's correct, but it creates a visceral reaction. Remember, we talked about how you make people feel, right? So unfortunately, I think that it's putting up a barrier that doesn't need to be there. Because when we start talking about the causes or the reasons for people to be involved with the police, a large number of them are because of an economic situation or addictions or mental health. And none of those issues can be addressed by the police. The police are not social workers. They're not addictions counselors. They do get some training in that, but as we've seen, especially over the past few weeks, it is not enough. It is not the right role for them. So the defunding really is talking about, and I'm just starting my journey on understanding all of this myself, but the defunding is taking money away from the police departments that may otherwise be used into making our police more militarized, which I think we have to back away from. There may need to be units of the police that can be like SWAT teams that can, I mean, that's a US term, but that can be called in certain circumstances. But our average police officers should not be driving around in military style vehicles with military style weapons. You know, we need to be backing away from that kind of policing model, except for in circumstances that warrant it. And that will release a lot of funds. Like even here in Halifax, the HRM has voted against going through with the purchase of a military-style vehicle for the police department in Halifax. And I applaud that decision because it's not necessarily something we need in that environment. And we have the military that we can perhaps have an agreement to borrow equipment from if we need to in a certain circumstance. I'm not advocating using military force or personnel against Canadians on Canadian soil. I think we have to have a hard line against that. But so we really have to look at what policing is. And it comes down to the mindsets of, are we the upstream thinkers that Greens are always saying that we are, or are we reactionary and putting band-aids on problems? I like green solutions being upstream. Let's go back to what the source of the real problem is. And when the source of the real problem is because people are stealing because they can't, stealing food because they can't afford to feed their families, or they're desperate or what have you, those issues need to be addressed, and that you can't do that through policing. So funding needs to be shifted, and that's going to be a transition. I don't see how that can happen overnight. And there has been, interestingly enough, there has been different variations on this used in different cities throughout the US and around the world. And so I think there's a lot that we can learn from that, but we have to get past that visceral, oh my God, who's going to protect me reaction, because they're not talking about abolishing all policing. They're talking about policing smarter and not having a police service and not a police force. So there's power in language as well. And I think sometimes too we get confused a little bit because US policing and Canadian policing is different. Not saying that we don't have the same or similar problems in Canada, we do. But we have to be sure that we're looking at issues that are Canadian policing and not reacting to some of the horrendous stuff that's coming out of the States right now, which I think is a symptom of larger problems.
Yeah, I lived in California for 3 years. That's where I did my graduate down in San Diego. And I was appalled at the police there. I was shocked. Like, I remember once going through a parking lot and there was a stop sign, not a stop sign, but just stop written on the road. And I didn't see it, and I went right through. Well, this policeman pulled me over and he just started reaming me out. And I'm used to the RCMP who they'll say, "Good evening. Do you have, or how are you tonight? Do you have any idea what you did wrong?" And they're really polite with me and all this kind of stuff. And it's reaming me out. And anyways, and he made me so nervous I started giggling, which made it even worse. But but I've had other experiences with American police like that. It's like they are trained to be sort of the bad, the teacher yelling at the kids, and that just doesn't work. As a teacher, I can tell you that doesn't work with kids.
No,
it does not work.
Exactly.
Right.
It doesn't work for adults either. So yeah, I think we need to really be looking at and we've tried incremental reforms in our police prior over the last few decades, and they don't stick because the problem is systemic. It's absolutely systemic. And even those who are in the policing, like I can't remember what her title was, but she's the head of the RCMP, had said that she believed that there was racism, but she wasn't comfortable with calling it systemic. Now she's done a little bit more looking into what the terminology is, and then she said, yes, I should have said that it is systemic. I would have thought that I would have expected more from somebody in her position in terms of understanding what she's having to deal with within that police service. I was a little taken aback that she didn't understand that. The average citizen, I wouldn't necessarily expect them to know, but somebody who's in policing, where this is an ongoing discussion, has been for decades, that they would have educated themselves better on this. But that again speaks to the culture within that police force. And it is different. We've got some small town police services that don't have the same issues. And we have some small town police services that have just as bad or worse issues. So we really need to be looking at this overall in terms of what are we expecting our police to do, and let's make sure that we have the right people doing the right jobs.
Yeah. Now moving on to another question. So, of course, we've been going through this whole COVID-19 thing, and of course, there's a lot of cries coming from us greenies
Mhm,
about this is the perfect time to make the transition. Let's do it. How would
mhm.
you implement such a thing? Because obviously, we've got the premier in Alberta, who's he's who he is, right? Not that far from Trump. No, actually, I should say that he's a million miles from Trump. Nobody's as bad as Trump, right? But
Mhm.
so, what would be your implementation then? What's your plan?
Okay, for moving forward, it's interesting. I've been reading a really good article, and it talked about, COVID-19 could be looked at as a hole that we all fall into the abyss, or a portal, and
Yeah.
we get to decide what's going to be on the other side. And I love this because one of the things that differentiates the Green Party is that we have a fairly clearly defined vision of what our ideal future is. And it fits so perfectly into exactly what we need right now.
Uh-huh.
I'm just loving when other parties and senators even are coming forward and saying, oh yeah, we should really look into this UBI thing. Universal basic income. And I'm like, yes, we've got even better plan. It's called guaranteed livable income. And it's much more equitable. And we have it all fully costed. We have solutions for each of the problems we have going forward. It's almost like one of the biggest pushbacks on changing what needs to be changed for climate change, to fix climate change, is that, oh, you can't stop the economy, you can't turn on a dime. Well, it's like Mother Nature said, oh, you can't, here's a virus, practice, right?
Yeah.
So as horrendous as it is, and my heart goes out to the people who've lost a family and friends during this crisis. It is an opportunity that, and the experts say we only have a very narrow window as we're reopening to shift in the direction that we need our economy to go into. Green jobs, a lot of the jobs that were lost are not coming back. So we have to replace them with something. Let's replace them with green jobs. Let's get that transition that we talked about all through the last election with Mission Possible. Let's get that in place. Get those energy workers creating clean energy. Let's get the retrofit of infrastructure upgrades and the retrofit of the national buildings so that they are net zero. Let's get working on that and getting people working, because we're paying, the government's paying, whether it's with CERB or the 75% wage subsidy. Why don't we get people working? If we're paying for them, let's get them working on these things we need being done, and giving them good pay, and because people are all going shack-wacky, staying at home. We all need to get out and get working again. But I mean, we have the plans, and I could go through almost everything in our platform, and it is a solution to restarting our economy, just at the same as it's a solution to climate change. We can do both together, and we have this unique opportunity to do that. And if we don't, I will be so upset, because it's been handed to us. This opportunity has been handed to us, and we're getting momentum and buy-in from the other parties in a way that I don't think we ever would have, or wouldn't have in this time frame, without the stressors of COVID, really illustrating what's wrong with our current system. Even things like the distributed supply chain for critical items. That's really come under the microscope as well. There's just so many things that have been illustrated as not working. I mean, it's certainly the equity and how we value people by what they do, and then we turn around and realize that the lowest paid people are actually the most critical workers in our society. That should be a wake-up call for all of us. So I really am looking at the lessons that COVID is teaching us, and we need to use those to leverage the shift to the future that is going to serve us all.
Okay, now my next question is, well, I kind of know the answer to it, but I'm going to ask you anyways. How are you going to pay for this?
Well, I was actually very pleased that our last platform was fully costed and went through the Parliamentary Budgetary Office. We actually had to give a couple of kicks at the cat there to clarify some things. But I'm glad that we did that because it gives us the confidence to realize that, yeah, we can do this. Okay, so we're going to go with this first. It's a two-part answer. So yes, the things that we talked about, absolutely, taxing the extremely obscenely rich people, making sure that everybody pays their fair share of taxes, that the tax evasion loopholes are shut down. Let's pay Elections Canada to go after the people who we know, like the Panama Papers laid it out for us. And boo-hoo if some of our elected officials have money offshore. They should know better. Sorry. That should not be a reason not to be going after them. We need to be on a level playing field. I liked the small tax that was on the rapid electronic transfers that are used in high-speed trading. That makes a lot of sense to add that in. And that was like fractions of pennies on these transactions, but because they happen so often and so fast, it adds up fairly quickly. So we had some really unique ways of looking at it. But then if we even step back and we look at how are we paying for all of what's going on with COVID-19? How are we paying for this? It's called modern monetary theory. And what they're employing is the same thing they did in 2008 with the mortgage crash that kind of crashed the economies across the world, not to the degree that they are right now. And it's called quantitative easing. And it is a way, we're in a unique situation because of the Bank of Canada. The government can buy bonds from the Bank of Canada at zero interest, and those bonds can be forgiven. So it is a way of creating money when it's needed, and then it goes away after it's not. So it has been shown there was no inflationary bump after 2008, and that's one of the biggest criticisms with quantitative easing, is that it will push inflation. Well, it didn't after 2008. So if we're careful, it doesn't look like it will for COVID-19. So, I mean, this is not something that we can go on for decades doing, but to address a crisis in the short term, we absolutely can. So there is more tools available for the government to pay for these things than we once thought. It's not the same as running your own household budget. It's a little bit more flexible than that.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I was really disappointed in was, of course, the government came up with CERB, which is, kind of a precursor to, what's it called, the Guaranteed Livable Income. But I was really disappointed that a lot of people chose to take CERB rather than go pick fruit or whatever they would normally do.
Yeah.
How would you address that?
Well, I think that they actually have addressed that a little bit better. When CERB first came through, you weren't allowed to make any money. Now you're allowed to make money on top of it. So you're allowed to make $1,000 before they start sucking it back, right?
Okay.
And so that's making a difference. I think we have to be realistic though, in terms of would those people have been out picking fruit, or are they just unemployed from other jobs? Because
I was talking about the fruit pickers. That's the one that I was thinking about. I was talking about the fruit pickers, not other people. That's why I was focused.
Yeah. We have the same criticism here in Nova Scotia that, well, why isn't everybody out working on the farms? Why do we have to bring in temporary foreign workers? Well, the reason is still the same issues, the same barriers why we've always had to have temporary foreign workers on our farms in Nova Scotia are the farms are not on any kind of transportation route. Most of the people who are young enough and healthy enough to work on those farms don't have their own vehicles, and they pay very, very, very low wages.
Yes.
Yeah, very, very, and it's hard work, and it's not unskilled. You have to have skills to work on a farm. The farmers that I talk to who bring in their skilled labor as temporary foreign workers love them because they have the skills. They're not having to train them from scratch, and so it's not. And in our area, we have we have more of an aging population than in some ridings. So that's a factor here as well. We don't have that many young people, and a lot of the young people in West Nova leave the area to find work because there isn't a lot of work here, period. Even much less now with the number of businesses that are closing. So, you know, we've got a couple of problems going on now. We have businesses that are not going to reopen. You know, the reality is not all of them are going to reopen. Some of the businesses, the owners are looking at automation. And if they switch over to automation, those jobs aren't going to be available any longer either. We're really switching over from a, it's interesting, Thomas Toivin explains it quite nicely, how, let's see, do I have my notes for today? Maybe not. Basically, right now, what the kind of economy that we're working on right now is one that is labor plus energy. Well, the labor portion of it is slowly receding, and it's energy. It's energy that's running our economy. And so when the labor portion of it is what's provided paychecks that distributed the wealth, if you take the labor out of the equation and you have just energy, what happens to all the people who now don't have jobs and don't have work to do to earn a living to be able to pay their way, because the jobs are now automated? And that is the direction we're going in. And that's one of the things about universal basic income or guaranteed livable income that we don't talk enough about, is that what are the other things that people do when they're on guaranteed livable income, when they stay home, if they're not working? You know, some people may be going to school, some may be raising their children, some may be looking after ailing family members, some may be creating amazing artwork that they couldn't do otherwise. Some may be starting a new business, and they've got that security that allows them to do that. Others may be out in the community doing amazing things. Like, we have amazing volunteers doing phenomenal work in our communities across Canada. But they, you know, how much more could people do if they weren't exhausted from working 2 and 3 jobs? You know, I don't know very many people who only have 1 job in our area. You know, they have 2 or 3 and a side gig on top of it, because there's fewer and fewer full-time, well-paying jobs. They're multiple part-time, because the companies can get away with that because they don't have to pay, and it's cheaper for them if they don't have to pay. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Is this something that you would like to have changed? These part-time jobs, so they don't have to pay medical and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It seems to me that's a little crooked.
It is.
Not very
I think it's predatory. You know, I'm a business person myself. Like I said, I've had four companies, but I wouldn't hire somebody unless I could give them a livable wage. And when you play games like that, I think that's predatory. You know, whether you're predating, there's nothing wrong with earning a profit, as long as that profit doesn't come on the backs of people or the planet. You know, so if you're creating an effluent that's destroying the environment, or you're not treating your workers fair and equitably, that's predatory. And I think we need to really clamp down on that, whether the companies are Canadian or international. We really have to clamp down. You know, there's unions. That's why unions came into being, is because businesses were looking at the bottom line and not looking after their people. You know, I love this. I was taught early on by a mentor that, you know, you look after your people and they'll look after your customers, and then your business will thrive. You know.
And feel about the 4-day week?
I think it's brilliant. You know, you're still doing 40 hours, and that's something that people don't think about. It's a 10-hour day, 10 hours a day, but for 4 days, that gives you a lot more time with family. It gives you more time for leisure, and an extra 2 hours a day isn't that onerous. You know, as somebody who's done 12-hour shifts on a regular basis with the military, I think it's well worth looking into. There's a lot of research that's been done on it that shows that it's really, really good. You know, and things like more creative, like job sharing. Some of the things we're going to see coming out of COVID-19 is more allowing people to work from home. Now, that's kind of a double-edged sword, because Working from home, the good things are that you don't have the commute, so you've got more time during your day. You're saving on gas and that sort of thing. But you have to be really disciplined in your hours so that you're not always at work. And as somebody who has been self-employed for many years, you have to be really disciplined with that, or it can take over your life, and that's not healthy either.
That's very, very true, for sure.
Yeah.
But does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask? Because we're running out of time. We only have about 6 minutes left. Gavin, you're really good with the questions. He was really upset about that whole Michael Moore film.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you there?
Well, I was upset about some of his lack of research, but he did make some very good points.
He did.
And the greenwashing and the biomass, because the whole story of biomass was, well, somebody has a cornfield and the corn husk and the stems and stuff are going to be converted to alcohol. Well, fine. But it turns out, no, they're chopping down trees and burning the trees. Like, what?
Yeah,
what?
and we do that. We have a biomass incinerator here in Nova Scotia that we are really trying to get them to shut down, and they're clear cutting old growth Acadian forests to feed this biomass that's generating electricity, which is the worst ratio of efficiency for creating electricity. It's just horrible. So yes, he did have some good points. I agree with you though. When my first instinct when I watched that was, okay, we already know that. Okay, and okay, we've already moved past that one. Yeah. And we know that, like, when was this, when did he film this? And then, there are a couple of points. We do have to be really careful about the greenwashing. We have to be really careful about what minerals and how they're mined for our batteries and that sort of thing. I think we have to be very careful about that. We have to do what I call full cost accounting, which is looking at everything that goes into it, not just the, whoa, this is a windmill, awesome. Okay, so how was that windmill built? How far were components shipped? We have to look at the whole carbon cost of creating things like that, and be smart about it.
Yeah, like cradle to grave accounting, which is missing. Looking at our raw resources, gold mines.
Absolutely.
And what did they do with the mercury that they used to extract? Oh, well, they just dumped it in the ground.
Yeah.
And and of course they didn't pay for the cleanup. Just well, the tar sands will be the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing
I think also, like, they did talk about the elephant in the room, which is population control, but they didn't talk about, what the stats show us is the best way of population control is actually empowering women, educating them, providing free birth control, and letting them choose family planning. And that is absolute best.
That's a great big huge thing that I have been kind of trying to push. I remember the Canadian Pediatric Society came out about a year ago, and they said that they should make birth control for women free up until the age of 25, because if you're once you're 25, you got a job, you can afford it. And they did this down in Colorado, and they were able to reduce teen and young woman pregnancies by 47%. I mean, that is huge. 47%.
It is, and they finished university and are at least high school, university, and the stats are also showing that the more educated women are, the less likely they are to have children.
Yeah.
Or many children.
Yeah, or as many children.
Yeah.
But there is even, it's actually going further than that now, Suzanne. I was reading an article this week that the more educated people are, and it depends. Part of it is if somebody is going in and doing a master's and a doctorate and they're very career focused, they may choose not to have children. So it is a little bit of that as well. But up to the grade 12, absolutely, they will have less children.
One thing, a lot of people complain about foreign workers coming in here and, oh yes, they're taking your jobs and stuff, but they do jobs that Canadians just won't take or qualify for. But
they're not taking any jobs. The farmers bring them in because they can't get the locals to do that.
That's right.
I have a friend who's a farmer. I go work for an hour in her field and I'm toast. And
Yeah.
I used to pick grapes and apples in the Okanagan. I worked
Yeah.
for both the canneries that were in Summerland.
Sure, summer job, go out picking berries, right?
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
It's seasonal. I think every kid in Annapolis Valley here, as well as in the Okanagan, there's a lot of similarities in terms of being a fruit belt. Yeah, I mean, you do that and you learn it, and you do it, but it's hard work. It's hard physical
Yeah, it's very
work.
hard work, yeah.
Yeah.
But what people don't think of is that they're spending their money here as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely they are. Yeah.
Exactly. Actually, I don't know if you found this true, but when I was knocking on doors, what really surprised me is the people who were ranting about immigration were the ones who themselves.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? You came from China? Where's it? What? And I was just really confused.
That would be confusing. That would be confusing.
It was bizarre.
Yeah.
It was just bizarre.
Well, I
Right.
think we're on the right track with our immigration policy. You know, that they are ensure that the people coming in will have be put in a receptive community, and that there are jobs available and supports for them and language training and all of
Yes.
that. Now, we couldn't open the floodgates and be able to provide all those supports. It just wouldn't happen. You know, I have friends who are Syrian refugees who came here about 5 years ago, and they've been working really, really hard to get her mother and brother and his family in, and they were within a week of having them on a plane to get here when everything shut down for COVID. So now they're scrambling to pay for their house here to hold it for them, and to pay for their extra living expenses where they are stuck still over in the Middle East, waiting for the borders to open. So it's tough. And having kind of followed them through this process, I realized that it isn't about there being a whole bunch of free handouts. You have to have sponsors. You have to have people that are paying for you, and have to have all of your expenses for the first, I think, year at least covered before you're even allowed into the country. And they do extensive background checks, and that can take a long time for people who are in refugee camps, because the paper trails are often lost. And that's part of the problem with people coming who don't have accreditation from their universities. So they could be coming in as doctors and respiratory therapists and nurses, but unless they have the original documents from the original university to be sent here, their accreditation is not accepted. So we really have to look at that, even aside from refugees, but look at that process in Canada, because we've got, especially in areas where we are in critical need of these skills.
Yeah, and one of the things I was going to say is, when I was a kid, I grew up in Chilliwack, which is about an hour east of Vancouver, small town, and we had a really bad shortage of nurses one year, so they brought in all these Filipino nurses. They were the best nurses ever, and apparently Filipinos aren't able to come and become nurses right away in Canada anymore. And I'm like, why not? I mean, I've never seen such hard workers and caring people. And I know I'm probably stereotyping, but they really are a wonderful culture, and so caring. And anyways, this bothers me.
Oh, it does. It bothers me as well. Did you know that there are barriers between professionals, or even not just doctors and nurses, but even carpenters who are Red Seal certified, to get their certification from province to province?
Oh, really?
It's not an open flow. You have to go through and be recertified in the other province. We need to smarten up that system, because there's a lot of skills and opportunity being lost in red tape that I don't think needs to be there. I mean, yes, there are different building standards, and there are different standards because each of the provinces, both medical and building, is a provincial responsibility. So there are certain things, but certainly they could be doing some upgrading and testing to make sure that they are at the same standard as if they had been trained in that province.
Yeah. Anyways, we're kind of out of time here. It's 8:04, and so thank you very, very much for coming. I'm very pleased to have met you.
Yes, thank you very much.
I heard a lot of good things about you, and it looks like it's true. You're very organized, and you know, that sort of thing. So that's good.
Thank you. Thank you. I know.
Thanks, Judy. It was good to hear you talk.
Oh, awesome, June. Thanks for coming
Yeah.
all the way from Nova Scotia with me.
All the way from Nova Scotia. My little arms are tired. Yeah.
Yes, yes, I know. All that flap, flap, flapping.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. And Gavin and Michael. Michael, did you get a chance to ask questions?
Silent.
Is microphone off?
His microphone is off. We can unmute you.
In Nova Scotia, there's a gentleman named James Hill who is a maestro with the ukulele.
Oh, cool.
Check him out on YouTube. He makes that simple little instrument do wonderful things.
Oh, awesome. Well, watch because we're doing a fundraiser this week because we've got a few more dollars we need to make that 10,000 by next Friday. And we're doing an Acadian kitchen party.
Oh, Kaylee.
Yep, for 2 hours, we'll be doing Acadian music, and you're welcome to watch. And if you would like to donate, that would be wonderful. My website, of course, is judyngreen.ca. And any support, and sign up for the newsletter so you know what's going on. And
I'm going to post this all over Facebook so I don't forget.
yeah,
So
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
I know myself, so you know.
Mhm. Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you all so very much.
Well,
Thank you.
very much.
Wonderful. And I'm hoping at some point we'll get a chance to travel out there. I'm not sure it's going to happen this year, though, the way things are going, but we'll see what happens. Mhm.
Okay, good. Thank you, and good night.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Good night.
everybody.
Night.
Yeah, good night, all.
Night,
Good
night.
night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night, John boy.
Night, Mary Ellen.